And then you get reports of what people call black panthers. And that is an entire rabbit hole unto itself. My name is Chester Moore. I am a wildlife journalist. Means I write about wildlife, fishing, hunting, conservation. And I'm just interested in all of this from a journalist perspective. There's a story, and I don't cover it a whole lot, but I have in the past. And I think anything where there's like a mystery there is just, I think, a naturally intriguing thing for a journalist to dive into.
Well, I agree. I think it is a fascinating subject. I personally haven't had an encounter, but I am just fascinated with all the experiences that other people have had. So, what have you found out since you've been writing about this subject?
Well, like I said, I haven't done anything really writing about in a long, long, long time. The only work I do in this realm now is I work with kids facing special challenges. We do wildlife encounters for kids who have critical illness, loss of a parent or a sibling in the foster system. And we have kids who are interested in this topic. So we'll do some field expeditions and stuff. But, just in work I've done in the past, it was mainly just talking to people who had some kind of a strange occurrence, or also, at times scientists who are working on projects involving with this, like, you know, um, footprint analysis, genetics, and that kind of stuff. And that was always really interesting to talk to people.
Well, it is. Yeah. Tell us what you found from that. What was some of the evidence they were finding from that scientific research?
Stuff at the time was just like there was a guy named Jimmy Chilcutt who was a latent fingerprint examiner for a police department, and there had been dermal ridging on some footprints that had been in a museum, and there were others that came along, and he was basically saying this was dermal ridging that was a primate, but definitely not from a known um, primate or whatever. And I always thought that was an interesting take on it. That was one of the ones that really stood out. And there were other people doing some analysis of, alleged tissue samples and things like that. But all that stuff came back inconclusive. But to me, the footprint analysis part was probably the neatest.
Did you see footprints that were believable to you that had some validity to them?
I mean, I think those tracks are pretty interesting. And by the way, what is this going to be for again? I forget. You told me.
This is my YouTube channel. I do a
Uh-huh.
lot of interviews. I've done about 200 interviews with people
Yeah.
who either have experiences or they're researchers or they're authors or something like that
Yeah.
generally
Yeah.
about cryptids, Bigfoot
Yeah. I
stuff.
thought it was just cryptids in general. That's what I was wanting to
Yeah.
ask. Yeah.
Oh,
So
and yeah, and we can get into other cryptids
I'm a
as
lot
well.
more interested in the Black Panthers and stuff like that. I've done a ton of my own research on that. But yeah, so the prints that Jimmy Chilcutt had looked at, and I don't remember, they may have been from Washington, I think. That was to me some of those compelling evidence. And then some vocalization stuff that's out there. Um, that was always interesting. There was some stuff that was examined by Texas A&M at one point, and all of that stuff was very interesting to me because as someone who spends an unbelievable amount of time in nature, I mean, there were just some things that, and this is predating modern technology for faking stuff, you know? So that was interesting. And honestly, in any cryptozoological research now, to me, evidence is almost always less, especially eyewitness stuff, less reliable now because everyone knows all the terminology and can back engineer a sighting or back engineer evidence. It's a lot harder for me to look at some of this stuff now when someone comes up speaking a bunch of lingo. I heard a tree knock and I found a limb twist and all this stuff. And it's like they're reading a template from a YouTube video. So it's, to me, that makes it a lot harder to navigate.
Yeah, exactly. So, in your research, just in wildlife in general, like you said, you have a lot of interest in the Black Panther, but
Yeah.
we're told that there isn't a lot of that evidence in some of the cats out there as well. But talk a little bit about that.
So the cat thing's very interesting because I live in an area of Texas where there's a lot of cats. So just in general, in North America, and let's just say in the continental United States, okay, take Mexico out of this. Native to America, you have the mountain lion, also called a puma, also called a catamount in Canada, a panther, but a mountain lion. Felis concolor. You have a bobcat. You have a lynx. You have, believe it or not, jaguars are native to the U.S., southern U.S. They're no longer permanently here. You have the ocelot, and you have the jaguarundi. And the ocelot, jaguarundi, and jaguar were found along the southern corridor. So this rich cat thing, but like everything that happened when we went west and everything was slaughtered before the era of the modern hunter conservationists and Teddy Roosevelt and all those guys, we wiped out a lot of stuff. And so as prey populations were wiped out, so predators didn't have much to eat, and they were also targeted. So now that we've had, white-tailed deer in 1900 being 500,000 whitetails, now we have 27 million whitetails. We have the rise of like 6 or 7 million feral hogs in America, a lot more stuff to eat. And then all of a sudden, there were no mountain lions supposedly wiped out in, Tennessee or North Carolina. And now we're getting game cam photos. These animals are coming back. So a lot of people will argue that there's not even like mountain lions east of Texas or even east of I-35, which is the Dallas area of Texas. And then you get reports of what people call black panthers. And that's the one that really gets people interested, because there are so many reports of people seeing they saw a black panther. And that is an entire rabbit hole unto itself.
Well, tell me what that rabbit hole looks like.
That's where we're going to go here. So, first off, when people think black panther, they are thinking of a cat they saw in a zoo or on a television program that's large and black. Well, there's no such species. If you look at a worldwide felid guide that's going to say black panther, it doesn't exist. The black cats seen in zoos, television, etc., are melanistic, which means black, predominantly black, melanin showing up in the pelage of the animal. Leopards or jaguars. Mountain lions, cougars, there's never been ever a black specimen brought to a taxidermist, killed and brought in, born in a zoo or a captive setting. And there are thousands of these animals in captive settings around the world. There are thousands of legally killed and harvested around the country. It's never popped up in the mountain lion. So you got to ask yourself, there are literally tens of thousands of reports of people saying they saw black panthers in America. What are they seeing? I'm telling you right now, there are some people who probably see a mountain lion, a darker colored brown mountain lion in low light, but people are seeing, and I get game cam photos sent to me all the time, or cell phone photos of a black cat at a distance, and they say that this is a black panther. They are not seeing a black leopard. There are jaguars that are crossing the border into Arizona and New Mexico that have been caught on game camera. They're all standard colored jaguars. And I don't believe people are mainly seeing jaguars. So, and we're talking about New York, Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas, California, black panthers people are seeing. So you got to ask yourself, what are people seeing? My opinion is there are several answers to this question. There bobcats, okay, which are distributed in every lower 48 state and in Canada, do throw melanistic offspring. There are black bobcats. They have been killed by hunters and stuff. There have been some in captive settings on game. We know this for a fact. And I know that a vast majority of people can't tell the difference between a mountain lion and a bobcat. How do I know this? I have probably had 300 bobcat photos sent to me in the last 5 years from people wanting to know if it was a mountain lion they were looking at. And it was obviously a bobcat. Bobcats actually have a tail. Some of them are longer than you think. But they do throw a black offspring. That is a possibility for what people or some people are seeing. I think the jaguarundi, which has not been observed in America in a number of years, but we're native to Texas and along Arizona. I think there are some isolated jaguarundi populations. They're a smaller cat, but they can be really long in a body, and they're not black. They're like dark brown, dark gray. That could be a possibility. But in my opinion, the vast majority, I know from the photos that I see to identify black panthers, I would say out of all the photos that I've ever examined personally, 85% I would say are domestic house cats, feral cats. Some of them very, very large. People can't judge scale. So I think a lot of, and I know it's a deflating thing, but I think a lot of the Black Panther sightings, I know for a fact, a lot of them are domestic feral house cats. And some of these are growing large. There's actually some studies in Australia showing house cats getting 40, 50 pounds that are feral cats there. And I've seen some cats that are photographed. I even got one on my own game cam that I guarantee if someone that didn't know what they're looking at saw, they think, oh, that's a Black Panther, but it was some kind of a feral house cat. So I think that's a big answer to a lot of what people see as Black Panthers.
That's going to be a major disappointment to a lot of those Black Panther viewers
Well,
because a
I
house
mean, I
cat.
know. Look, I'm going to get hate mail from this. I already have. I've had people go. I mean, and I just think that. Well, I'll tell you that's the majority of what I've seen. I can't explain. Like I said, there's about 15% of the photos that I can't tell what's there. Too far away, scale's different. It's mysterious. I leave that up to interpretation. I don't know. I do not believe they are mountain lions. If they were melanistic mountain lions, somebody would have already killed one. They'd have been more. There's been white mountain lions more. Okay, there's a white mountain lion born. There's a white mountain lion clear photo taken in Brazil on a game camera. But I do not believe people are seeing black mountain lions. I think a lot of them are. And you got to think about the Black Panther phenomenon is around the world. It's in Australia. It's in England. What is the one cat species that is all around the world? The domestic cat. And I think that is the vast majority of Black Panther sightings. I think it is possible, although not probable, that some of these sightings are melanistic jaguars. We know there are some standard colored jaguars that have moved across the borders of Arizona. And matter of fact, I was just at Chiraqua National Monument 2 years ago, a week after one was caught on a game camera photo there, a beautiful, typical spotted jaguar. But I think the majority are domestic house cats. And I think some of them, for whatever reason, are getting large. And then you have to ask the question of hybridization of cats. Is it possible that there have been some feral domestic hybridization with bobcats or even mountain lions? I don't know. No one's studying this. But I think there are many answers to the Black Panther phenomenon. And I think the most clearly abundant is that most people are seeing domestic house cats and can't tell scale. I think bobcats that are black are part of this. I think cougars in low light conditions. And I think the kind of fourth option that's a possibility in some signs could be a melanistic or black jaguar.
How big are like bobcats and mountain lions size wise, pounds? Do you know?
Well, so like a mountain lion would be probably your average cat's 100 pounds for a mountain lion, but up to 150 maybe. A bobcat, a gigantic one's 40. But I'm telling you, people can't tell scale. I have literally had over 300 photos sent to me in 5 years of people, and I don't belittle them. I mean, I'm not everyone's a wildlife, expert or whatever. I'm glad I get these photos and explain these things, but I'm telling you, over 300 of these people thought were mountain lions or asked if they were mountain lions were bobcats.
Let's look at, if a house cat that goes feral and
Yep.
becomes larger than normal,
Yep.
and if there is a possibility that could mate potentially with either a mountain lion or a bobcat or something like that, then that could create some kind of a hybrid cat potentially that could be quite large.
Well, that is a potential thing. And the problem is there's no like mainstream genetic study on this. I have photos of 2 different bobcats that were sent to me. People just asking, what in the heck is this cat? Because it was a bobcat clearly by the body, but it had an ocelot's pattern on it. And I've actually seen one of these in captivity. And I have a theory that at some point there was hybridization out there between ocelots and bobcats, and it pops up in the genes sometimes. So is it possible that these feral cats bred with the bobcat or bred with whatever? I don't know, but it's interesting that you take a male lion and you breed it to a female tiger and you get a liger. And a liger, I've seen one. I've been 5 feet away from a liger before, where might get 800-900 pounds, which is 250 pounds larger than the largest cat in the world naturally occurring, which is a Siberian tiger. However, if you take a male tiger and breed it to a female lion, you get a tigon, and it's about the size of a tiger, about 400 pounds. So is there some kind of combo that happened out there that could have created some genetic oddities? I mean, I know I have a camera photo that I examined from South Texas that I initially thought might have been a Jaguarundi, but it was more domestic cat in stature, but it was large and black, and it was not mountain lion size at all, but it had a long tail. And could we just be seeing some kind of evolution of domestic cats, or is there something that we've missed out there with all these domestic cats for the last 200 years running wild in America? Because feral cats are everywhere. I mean, I've seen feral cats in Yellowstone. I mean, so it's definitely part of the equation of what's going on out there, in my opinion.
Well, if let's just hypothetically think about if a feral cat, is bred with another large wild cat out there, would we then, even though that's a hybrid, would we then have a unique species in the wild?
We would have a hybrid. I don't know if it would create a species. I mean, I don't know if it'd be fertile. You have to ask yourself that question. Some hybrids are not fertile. It could be that there's something going on out there. There's definitely, and this is another part of this equation that deviates from the Black Panther thing, but goes into like spotted cats. I wrote an article, it was 2 years ago, and it's talking about the prevalence of Bengal cats. I have 3 Bengal cats, okay, at our zoologic facility. A Bengal cat is now a domestic breed, but they originated from hybridizing an Asian leopard cat, which looks a lot like an ocelot, a true wild cat with a domestic tabby cat to create like a wild-looking hybrid cat. We have 3 of them in our facility. They're a domestic registrable breed now, but they have Asian leopard cat lineage. Well, there are thousands of Bengal cats in America. There are also savanna cats. So you take an African serval and you breed it to whatever domestic cat they bred it to, you create a savanna cat, which creates a slightly more domesticatable, serval-looking wild cat. Well, I got a photo a couple of years back from someone in South Texas of a cat they thought was an ocelot crossing their driveway. They live out in the middle of nowhere on a ranch. So it's crossing the driveway going out toward the woods. And in my first glance, I thought that looks like a stinking ocelot. They're right, that might be an ocelot. And it's within range, within 50, 60 miles where there are wild ocelots, which are only a handful in America. And then I looked in and realized that was a Bengal cat that had the ocelot type pattern. And I located that there's a breeder of that particular strain of Bengal cat about 20 miles. So in the wild now, we have exotic designer feral cats. These cats escape going around, and they're a lot wilder than some of the, maybe can survive better than some of the regular domestic cats, which do great anyway. And they look like an ocelot. They look like a margay. They look like a serval. As a matter of fact, I have one sent to me last week, a video from a security cam at a home. I couldn't tell because it was at night. It was either a serval, which is an African cat, or it was an F1, which is the first generation, a hybrid of a serval and whatever domestic cat they breed to get a savanna cat. So that's a whole different thing. All kind of wild, exotic looking cats running around America.
So, and there's no one actually making an effort to categorize these, to find out what they are, where they are. Is there any effort? Is there any organization out there doing that?
None. And the problem is these are feral cats, and feral cats are an absolute menace to wildlife. I mean, they kill billions of small animals, literally, and birds every year. So there's not an interest in cataloging them. I think other than like the people doing Black Panther research, I'm the only one I know of that's even mentioned these other domestic cats that are going out there and written published articles and podcasts and stuff on. There's this whole other strain of like feral cats now that look like, ocelots and stuff running around. And I probably have gotten 20 photos from Michigan to Texas to New York to Florida of these cats in the wild in people's, in pastures and on their deer leases and stuff like that. So they're getting a different kind of cat. So people say, I saw something and it wasn't a bobcat. It wasn't a mountain lion, but it had spots and a longer tail. What did I see? And a lot of times it ends up being one of these designer domestic hybrid cats.
So what would you suggest? Is there any way or thing that people can do if they see something like this, to bring a little more attention to it, or to have more of an understanding of what they're actually looking at?
Well, it's funny you say that because I've thought about creating my own little field. So I wrote a book as a field guide to the wildcats of Texas, and I designated what I call the black longtail. And maybe this is the start of this. And it is these black cats that are very domestic in build, but bigger than domestic normally is in stature. And I call them a black longtail. That's kind of my name for them. They're not a panther, like they're not a leopard, and they're not a jaguar, or they're not a mountain lion. They're something else. But maybe I need to put together a little field guide to show some of these different domestic hybrid breeds that are running all over America to show people what they might be looking at, so they're not so confused. Because it's never a thing. The one bad thing about the cryptozoological and wildlife world, you get a lot of people who are elitist and want to shoot down everybody who has a wrong idea or wrong identification that is not me at all. I welcome a chance to educate people. And sometimes I just like, I don't know what I'm looking at. It's weird. I'll try to get back to you on it. So more of a like, hey, let's celebrate that we saw something cool and try to figure out what it really is.
Yeah, I would rather know what we're dealing with, what is actually out there, rather than to have some hypothetical idea of what it might be. I mean, yeah, find out what it is.
Yeah,
That's a
but
good
I'm
point.
telling you, I mean, I'm definitely the only one I've ever seen talking about these breeds. And what I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna have to go photograph my Bengals and put them out there and show you what, like Ozzy, he looks like an Asian leopard cat, a lot like an Asian leopard cat. And if you saw him in the wild, someone would think, oh my God, what did I just see? But I've even had funny stuff like this. A guy sent me a picture in front of his deer blind of this tabby cat. I mean, like tabby cat, like curled up in grandma's lap looking tabby cat. What kind of strange, the email was funny. It was like, what kind of strange, exotic, escaped zoo animal is this? I hate it. And I just try to be as easy as I could. I said, my friend, I hate to kind of bust your bubble, but that is a tabby cat. That's just an old tabby cat. But people see these in the wild and don't think they should be there. But there is this wilder looking element that are being, and they've even got to the point where there's a cat called Asa cat, and they're breeding a domestic cat to purposely look like an ocelot. So you have a lot of stuff out there that's being in like any animal. They get out, they get wild, and they thrive. So you're getting a new kind of cat on the horizon in the wild in America.
Well, even the domestic cat, once they get out in the wild and they become feral, and they perhaps create necessity of change, and can grow larger, like you said, and
Sure.
maybe take on different characteristics.
Yeah, and cats do a lot better than dogs do in the wild. Cats are never really tame. They're secretly trying to take over the world anyway. And but yeah, I think that's a good point. And I've seen this stuff all over. And if I didn't have the familiarity that I do with these hybrids, I would like I would go, what am I looking at? But a lot of them I look immediately and go, okay, that's an Asa cat, that's a Bengal, that's a Savannah. And people want to see something very wild and exotic, and I think that anticipation's part of it. But a lot of what people are seeing now are, and then there's even the weird stuff like the bobcat that's obviously a bobcat. I mean, obviously everything about bobcat except the pattern looks like an ocelot, but that was in Texas. It could have been a remnant of hybridization, which is the thing we always have to throw in. But without any studies going on in terms of genetics on this stuff, some of it's impossible to gauge. But I know from just photographic evidence, a lot of these cats I'm seeing are these hybrid domestic and designer breed domestic cats.
So let's move on to other cryptids. Is there any other cryptid that you tend to lean toward enjoying studying or have studied?
I mean, I think everybody who's into cryptozoology probably thinks Loch Ness is pretty cool. I've always thought that was interesting. Mokele and Bimbe in the Congo, but I've never really like studied that stuff. An animal that has always intrigued me, and I used to do a lot on, was the ivory-billed woodpecker. which is the largest woodpecker in the world that allegedly went extinct in the 1930s. And I wrote a lot on the ivory-billed woodpecker. There are still sightings of ivory-billed woodpeckers around, and they are intriguing birds. Zeiss Sports Optics sponsored a search for ivory bills in 2002, I believe it was, and they went to the Pearl River area. And I got to go out as a media person with a guy named Martian Lamertink, who was a birding specialist from overseas and somewhere in Europe, and then a guy named David Luno, University of Arkansas, who was the guy who rediscovered that there were, at least at one point a few years ago, an ivory bill left. He captured one on a video. And so then now it's mysterious again. Are there really still ivory bills left? I think there probably are a few ivory bills left out there. And that one definitely intrigues me. And then there's stuff that's not really like Bigfoot or Loch Ness that intrigues me, like giant snakes, like reports of these unbelievably large snakes that are like even like big rattlesnakes. My whole life, my grandfather told me about looking at a sports field, and there was a picture of a guy holding three guys in Orlando, Florida, holding an 11-foot rattlesnake. And he always had a specific story about this. And of course, an Eastern Diamondback is the largest. I think the largest on record is like 8 or maybe 7.5, something like that. And I asked a friend of mine who has a backlog of sports fields. He pulled it immediately off the shelf and sent me a scan of it. And there's this photo that was in the early 1900s of these guys holding this big, giant 11-foot long rattlesnake. So some of the like big, supersized specimens and stuff like that is really intriguing to me. That's always something. And then micro deer. Here's one. My uncle told me a story when I was a kid about going on a deer lease in Central Texas in San Saba County and seeing this 8-point buck walk out that was the size of a little bit bigger than a fawn, but it had a fully developed rack and built like a big buck, but he was a little bitty. And then when my uncle passed away, I told my dad about it. He goes, "Oh, I saw him on the same lease. He was on a lease with him. He saw the same deer, same kind of deer." Well, I put the word out and did a story about micro whitetails and got an amazing photo. You can go see at highercalling.net in my blog about micro deer of a buck that's probably the size of a fawn or a little bit bigger with a fully developed rack. And there's another deer behind it that looks, way smaller because the thing in the front of the frame should look bigger than the one in the back. And so I found out there's these little micro deer across America. So stuff like that's always interesting. And I was just in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and I got to photograph. I love wild turkeys. A smoke phase wild turkey. Most wild turkeys are your typical brown and black mix of colors. This was a ash gray and white, beautiful bird. Probably 1 in 100,000 turkeys are born that color. And so any anomaly like that, I think is kind of cool.
Well, yeah, exactly. So bring us back a little bit to Bigfoot. Since you entertain the idea that a lot of cryptids are possibly out there, possibly not discovered, or at least not to the satisfaction of people who feel like they have to have something that's really concrete.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of interviews with Bigfoot people, and a lot of people, it's just anecdotal. They have sightings, they have vocals. But those footprints, what are those if not some kind of a large human-like creature with these footprints at that size?
So I think the phenomenon is real. I don't know what the basis of it is, if that makes sense. I don't know what it is. But I'll leave the Bigfoot thing with the thing that I think you have to just say this is the fact that it only takes one eyewitness report to be true for there to be something there. And there are many. So I think that's where it's at. I think it's an enduring mystery. And I think it's a real phenomenon.
Have you heard the Sierra sounds, the recording
Oh,
of the
yeah.
Sierra
I just
sounds?
spoke at an event last weekend with Ron Moorhead, who recorded those, and talked to him about those sounds last weekend.
Those Sierra sounds are quite interesting. The very first Bigfoot video I did was I released it, I think, last January, and it was Scott Nelson's analysis of those. And those things have like a pattern of language in them, according to his
Mhm.
linguistic background that he has.
Mhm.
What do you think about that? Have you heard them? What do you think about the sound?
No, I think they're fascinating. I think they're real, whatever they are, and no one really knows what that is.
No
I
one,
think that
yeah, they
I
didn't
think that
see them making the sounds. They
no,
didn't know
no,
for sure that
no.
Bigfoot
I
made
think
those
it's a
sounds.
real thing. I don't think Ron Moorhead and his friends did not manufacture that. That's a real thing, and it's chilling to hear. And I just know it's real. And then we got to go figure out what made it, But it's a real thing. I mean, and it's I've heard something similar, not the vocal part necessarily, but the guttural growls of some of that stuff. Everybody picks out what they call the samurai chatter of it, but there's another section where it's more of a glow gutter. I've heard something like that before 2 times in my life.
Where were
Um,
you? Where were you when you heard those?
in
Tell me
in
about that.
in East Texas. Once when I was a kid and we got scared out of the woods by something, didn't know what it was. My dad and my uncle both left. We were rabbit hunting at night, and they thought it might have been a black bear or something, which occasionally would come into Texas. But I got to work with bears later on. Knew it wasn't a bear. It was just a guttural growl that's not anything known. Then I heard the same thing with my dad 15, 16 years later, another location in East Texas. And that's profiled in Lyle Blackburn's book, Texas Bigfoot. If you want to read Lyle's book, the whole story's in there. But it was a weird, just really scary, guttural stuff that sounded very howler monkey esque to me. It sounded, I had just been in Venezuela and worked with howler monkeys, not worked with them, but like photographed some on a fishing trip and got to mess with them, like growling back at them. And they got really mad at me and would growl at me and stuff like that. But it sounded very howler monkey esque. And some of that, there are parts of the Sierra sound that sound kind of howler monkey. That's not a howler monkey, but that sound howler monkey esque. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
It is, it's fascinating. And yes, the growls are very often heard in different tones and different ways, maybe different forms of communication
Mm-hmm.
that's coming out of those growls. Sometimes it's like, get out of here. Sometimes it's an intimidating growl. Sometimes it's just
Mm-hmm.
maybe getting a little too close for comfort here.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you felt? Did you feel like they were trying to give you a warning to leave?
Well, it doesn't take a rocket science when something's growling at you that's not happy. So that's what I knew. It was like I wasn't happy. It was scary sounding. The second time I heard it, I was fascinated. I wasn't really scared. My adrenaline went up because it was 4 o'clock in the morning, and we were about to leave a certain site that we were at. But it's one of those things. It was obviously like, hey, whatever that was, I was not happy with your presence. Like that kind of thing. Like, get out of here, pal. Um, it's a scary sound. Like, I mean, I remember being in the woods one night on a bow hunting for hogs at night with red lights because you can legally hunt hogs at night, and hearing this just like crazy guttural scream. I knew it was a hog, and I could see the outline of my little red filter light of a big hog. And then I realized there were about 50 hogs behind it coming through, and they surrounded a little stand I was in. Never got a shot that night, but I listened to them fight and go crazy and do all these crazy vocalizations people normally don't hear. And it reminded me that there are a lot of sides of animals, known and obviously probably unknown, that have communications that we maybe don't understand. But I think when you have something making a nasty growl at you, it's not saying, "Hey, come hang out." You know?
Exactly. It might be giving you a message to leave for sure. That sounds
Yeah, I think that's
reasonable to
more of
assume.
what I think that's more of what was going on. Like, get out of here, pal. You know?
Well, one of the questions I always ask, usually when people are around kind of Bigfoot activity, sometimes they see unusual lights, orbs, things like that. Have you ever had that type of an experience?
No, no, not in that realm. No.
Sometimes people do, sometimes they don't. So I always ask.
Hmm.
Is there any other cryptid that you'd like to discuss?
Like I said, I mean, I'm just interested in natural mystery that involves wildlife, and it's just a little part of what I do. The more important part of what I do with this is in our wildlife outreach, we will find kids that are interested in cryptozoology, and we take them on expeditions. And we just did one in the Big Thicket National Preserve area back in September, and it was great. Had a great time with those kids, and that's the more important part of what we do. And so if anyone knows a kid out there that might be facing some kind of real special challenge, um, loss of a parent or an illness or something like that, and they like this stuff, make sure and contact me, Chester at chestermore.com. Our ministry outreach, our goal is to bring the love of Christ to hurting kids through wildlife encounters. And believe it or not, I've had some Bigfoot loving kids have some expeditions, and they had an incredible time. So that's pretty much the only thing I do in that field is bring kids out and let them have a great time and use thermal imaging and night vision and taking the cool areas and try to inspire them, let them know something good can happen in life, maybe after a tragedy happened.